Find your quiet space now and settle into the deep stillness of this moment. We turn the dial of the Chronos Tapes far back to a city founded on 7 hills. Slowly Rome, not the roar of conquering legions, but the slow, persistent hum of a civilization that spanned 1,000 years. It is easy to measure history by noise, by the clashes of shields and the shouts of triumph. But tonight, we will listen for the whispers of Rome, the quiet truths of its people, the unhurried transformation of its soul. We seek to understand the city not as a moment of glory, but as a vast, continuous meditation on human effort and eventual decay. This is a journey through the persistent rhythm of its laws, the steady laying of its stones, and the slow shift of its deepest, most sacred values. Deep pause, let the ambient sound of the ancient world carry you now, as we begin to learn ancient Rome while we sleep. The story begins not with emperors, but with a powerful, almost stern idea. The idea of the Republic. It was a world governed by virtue. Pause, a profound sense of duty. The early Roman mind was anchored by 2 deep pillars of the spirit, pietas and gravitas. Pietas was more than piety. It was an unwavering sense of duty, loyalty to the family, to the ancestors, to the state, and to the gods. It demanded respect for the inherited order, a commitment to roles defined by centuries of quiet tradition. Slowly, it was the feeling that the past was present, that the eyes of the ancestors watched every choice made in the forum. The other pillar was gravitas, a deep seriousness, a profound sense of the weight of personal dignity and public responsibility. The early Roman citizen saw himself not as an individual pursuing pleasure, but as an essential, small piece of a great shared purpose. This commitment to shared duty was not always comfortable, but it provided an unshakable structure for the soul. Think of the simple rhythm of a Roman farmer's day, dictated by the seasons, disciplined by the requirements of the early militia. His tranquility was rooted in having fulfilled his duty, not in having satisfied his desires. Deep pause, this concept of shared sacrifice was formalized in the law, the bedrock that outlived all the armies, the establishment of the 12 tables, the quiet, slow process of defining just civilly. The civil law, it was the steady, methodical application of reason to the messy complexity of human interaction. The law provided a framework of stability. It ensured that disputes were settled by logic, not by the sword. This stability, this framework of rational order, was the true engine that propelled Rome from a small city to the master of the Mediterranean. The republican home, the Domos, was a quiet temple. Pause, it was there that pietas was most deeply felt. The hearth was the sacred center, a small, constant fire symbolizing the continuity of the family line. The images of the ancestors, the imagines, were displayed prominently, always watching, always reminding the living of their inherited standard of conduct. This constant, quiet surveillance encouraged integrity. You lived not just for yourself, but to honor those who came before you. The early Roman learned the value of patience from the vastness of the natural world. He learned discipline from the rhythm of the harvest. His ambition was for the good name of his family, not the ephemeral pleasure of the day. This inner discipline, this self-imposed restraint, was Rome's quietest and most powerful weapon. It was the virtue that prepared the soul for hardship. With the rise of the empire came the Pax Romana, the great Roman peace. This era was defined not by conquest, which had already occurred, but by the quiet, sustained maintenance of order. The most profound symbols of this peace were the roads, vast networks stretching thousands of miles, connecting the cold heart of Britain to the dusty heat of Egypt. These roads were not just military pathways, they were lines of rational organization. They symbolized the long reach of Roman stability. Imagine the sound of a lone traveler on a well-paved Roman road at night. A sound of order in a vast, dark world. The aqueducts were another quiet miracle, monuments to practical genius. They brought fresh, cool water flowing into the heart of dense cities. They taught the ancient world that engineering could bring comfort, that large-scale, coordinated effort could lift the daily burden of existence. This infrastructure was the quiet promise of the imperial age. Stability in exchange for absolute obedience. The mindset shifted subtly. The intense political duty of the republican citizen was replaced by the passive acceptance of the imperial subject. The grand scale of the empire demanded grand administration. A growing, quiet army of scribes, clerks, and governors. The machine grew larger, and the individual felt smaller. Deep pause, the focus moved away from the forum, and toward the local comforts, provided by the empire, the bread and circuses, the quiet exchange of political voice for material ease, a slow shift in the balance of the soul, the spread of Roman law, jus gentium, the law of nations, across the vast empire was a deeply calming force. It meant that no matter where you traveled, from the sands of Africa to the forests of Gaul, there was a predictable structure. This predictability of justice was a psychological comfort. It reduced the daily anxiety of arbitrary rule. The law became a language everyone could understand. It was the quiet, shared rhythm of the imperial system. The Roman engineer, the Roman lawyer, the Roman administrator. They were the true apostles of the empire's endurance. Slowly, they laid down the blueprint for stability. An elegant, rational structure designed to resist the chaos of human passion. Consider the silence within the walls of a Roman court. The slow, deliberate weighing of evidence. The search for rational truth. This patience of the legal process stood in stark contrast to the violence and heat of the battlefield. It was Rome at its wisest, at its most temperate. The Pax Romana was not merely the absence of war. It was the quiet confidence that tomorrow would resemble today. A profound source of inner peace for the subject. Deep pause in the quiet provinces. Life adopted a gentle Roman rhythm. Farmers tilled the land using methods improved by Roman science. Merchants traded with coins that held a predictable, steady value. Local communities gained aqueducts, baths, and orderly street plans. The world felt safer, smaller, more knowable. This sense of security bred complacency. The active virtues of the Republic were allowed to rust. Why endure hardship and political strife when the emperor's legions kept the borders quiet and the public works ran efficiently? The focus shifted from res publica, public matter, to res privata, private matter. The world shrank to the villa, the garden, the library. This turning inward was a kind of contentment, but it was also a slow erosion of civic muscle. The citizen was becoming too comfortable to be vigilant. The greatest empires do not always fall with a crash. Sometimes they simply fade, a long, historical sleep. This was the slow reality of the Western Roman Empire. The fall was not an event, but a centuries-long administrative fatigue. The early Roman virtues of pietas and gravitas became diluted. The empire was too vast, too complex to sustain the fierce personal loyalty of the Republican era. Economic strain became a constant, low-level pressure. Currency was debased. Trade became difficult. Trust, the quiet lubricant of commerce, slowly eroded. The machine of the state grew heavier. Bureaucracy swelled into a quiet, suffocating blanket. Every decision required layers of administration, slowing the flow of life, creating inertia where speed was needed. The vitality of the urban centers began to drain away. People sought security in rural estates, turning inward, away from the chaos of the public sphere. This was the great cultural shift, the turning away from the public life of the citizen to the private survival of the tenant. The Roman roads, once symbols of connection, began to experience less maintenance. The steady, persistent rhythm of repair was broken. The quiet discipline that built the empire was lost to the quiet fatigue of managing it. Deep pause. The weight of governing the empire became unbearable. Pause. The government tried to enforce stability through rigid control. Professions became hereditary. The farmer was bound to his land. The baker to his bakery. A frantic attempt to free society in place. This control did not bring order. It brought stillness, a quiet resignation, a loss of the very freedom that Rome once celebrated. Innovation slowed, not from lack of intelligence, but from lack of incentive. Why invent when the rewards are immediately seized by the state? The energy needed to maintain the baths, the temples, the aqueducts, slowly evaporated. The great structures began their silent decay. Stone by stone, it was not the invasion that destroyed the infrastructure. It was the slow, unglamorous failure of maintenance, the quiet loss of will. The spiritual landscape changed dramatically. Slowly new Eastern cults and the rise of Christianity offered solace that the earthly city could no longer provide. The focus shifted entirely from the forum to the inner life, from the glory of Rome to the promise of the divine. This spiritual withdrawal was deeply calming for the individual soul, but it was devastating for the Roman state. The best minds, the most virtuous souls, were now devoted to the salvation of the spirit, not the preservation of the material world. The ultimate duty shifted from pietas toward Rome to pietas toward God. This transfer of allegiance sealed the fate of the Western Empire. The barbarians who eventually crossed the borders often found the Roman spirit already asleep. They were not met by fury, but by indifference and apathy. Rome did not scream. It sighed and settled into a long sleep that marked the beginning of the medieval world. *et. Even in its quiet sleep, the echoes of Rome persist, the framework of its law, the very structure of our modern thought on governance. Our Roman whispers, the serene acceptance of the late Stoic philosophers, the attempt to find inner tranquility amidst external chaos. This wisdom outlived the legions and the emperors. It reminds us that systems may fail, empires may fade, but the quality of the individual soul, the private commitment to duty and integrity, remains the only constant. The lesson of the long Roman cycle is profound. It is a lesson of pacing. The empire that grew too quickly found itself burdened by its own weight. The citizen who grew too comfortable lost the virtue needed for survival. Slowly, greatness is not measured by the speed of conquest, but by the slow, steady persistence of noble endeavor. And decline is often the result of quiet, internal fatigue, a slow forgetting of fundamental values. Let this gentle wisdom guide your mind toward rest. May the enduring calm of the ancient world accompany your dreams. Sleep well, asterisk.